According to the American Heart Association, nearly 438,000 Americans die every year from tobacco-related diseases, with heart disease, strokes, and other cardiovascular disease accounting for nearly one-third of these deaths. Based on this statistic, it's obvious that there are still too many people in this country who are unaware of the negative effects tobacco use can bring, as well as the attempt to raise public awareness and also the attempt to regulate the tobacco industry. Even though we all come from different backgrounds and cultures, tobacco use affects all of us. Whether you smoke or have smoked, have a family member who smokes, or simply don't like to be exposed to it when you go out into public. For those who have never smoked, I hope that this speech will give you the information necessary to educate others in the hope that it keeps them from picking up the habit. I myself wish that I had this education because I had my first cigarette when I was 8 years old. No, I didn't become addicted at this time, but it was the beginning of my love-hate relationship with smoking. I've now been smoke-free for 5 years, but it took me 4 or 5 times before I was finally able to kick the habit for good. Today, I hope to give you information that perhaps you have not heard in the past. First, by discussing the history of tobacco. Second, by discussing the medical ramifications of tobacco use. And third, by discussing the attempt to raise public awareness and to regulate the industry. Most of us know that tobacco is a plant. However, you may not be aware that tobacco is actually native to North and South America and is very closely related to the potato and the pepper. Tobacco use can be traced as far back as 1 BC, when American Indians used it in their religious ceremonies and for medicinal purposes. As a matter of fact, American Indians gave dried tobacco leaves to Christopher Columbus when he came to the New World in 1492. It was his sailors who took tobacco back to Europe. Once in Europe, it was very widely used because they had the mistaken belief that tobacco had healing properties. It was used for everything from curing bad breath to killing pain to dressing wounds. It also had a role in the establishment of the United States because in 1776, it was used as collateral for loans received from the French to finance the American Revolution. During the 1950s, more and more health problems began to be linked to cigarette smoke. The tobacco marketers dismissed this. However, they did start to market low tar and filtered cigarettes. In 1964, the Surgeon General of the United States released a report detailing several health ailments that seemed to be associated with smoking, but it also established a direct link between lung cancer and cigarette smoking. It was this that prompted legislation to compel the tobacco industry to put warning labels on all of their products. At this time, they began to study tobacco more closely, and the real ramifications of tobacco use began to come out. According to the CDC, smoking increases the chance of getting certain cancers, such as cancer of the lip, the oral cavity, kidney, lungs, and bladder. African American men who smoke have the highest rate of contracting cancer. According to the National Institutes of Health, smoking increases your chance of blood clots, high blood pressure, emphysema, tooth and gum disease, and in pregnant women, it increases the instances of miscarriage and sudden infant death syndrome once the babies are born. Secondhand smoke causes problems for children, such as ear infections, respiratory infections, and asthma. And if you're an adult non-smoker and you're exposed to secondhand smoke, your chance of contracting heart disease and lung cancer increases by 20 to 30%. Now, once these ailments and many others were linked to tobacco use, it became the mission of many groups to educate the public, as well as attempt to regulate the tobacco industry as a whole. As I referred previously, in 1964, legislation was passed to force the use of warning labels, but this was only the beginning of the fight. In 1971, they were not allowed to advertise on television. In the 1980s, lawsuits began to be filed against the tobacco companies, citing the hazardous effects of their product. It wasn't until 1998 that a settlement was reached to award billions of dollars to 46 states and 5 U.S. territories. This year, 2009, the Family Smoking Prevention and Control Act was signed by President Obama which finally gave the FDA the right to regulate the tobacco industry. They can't ban tobacco entirely, but they can seriously constrict the way the tobacco industry is allowed to do business in this country. In conclusion, we've come a long way towards educating the public and regulating this industry. But even with all of these advances, there are still too many people who are unaware of the negative effects of tobacco use, the attempt to raise public awareness, and also the attempt to regulate the tobacco industry. Today, I hope that I have provided you with information that you can use later on by discussing the history of tobacco, the medical ramifications of tobacco use, and the attempt to raise public awareness and regulate the industry. One thing that we must remember, that ultimately we are all responsible for making sure that the public is educated. We have to make sure our children know how dangerous this is, and we have to make these companies responsible for their actions.